Imagine having the power to, literally snap your fingers and just end a life.
Right. Absolute power.
Yeah, absolute power. Imagine commanding massive armies, possessing just unimaginable wealth, and having your own face stamped on the currency of the known world.
It's hard to even wrap your head around,
It
really.
is. And now imagine using that absolute power to step away from your glittering court, sit completely alone in a freezing military tent, and write this desperate reminder to yourself that you are, well, nothing but a sack of rotting bones.
Which is exactly what we're talking about today.
Exactly. Welcome to a new deep dive. Today we're looking at a stack of sources that offer a profoundly weird and rare window into the mind of a ruler. We've got the text of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, alongside some historical biographical notes, and a collection of highly personal letters between Marcus and his tutor, Fronto.
And these sources together are just incredibly revealing.
Yeah. Our mission today is to investigate a massive historical and psychological paradox. Basically, what does the most powerful man in the world write when the audience is only himself? And what happens when a private document of, like, brutal self-examination accidentally becomes the very thing history remembers you for? Okay, let's unpack this.
It really is one of history's greatest contradictions, without a doubt. But to truly understand why the Meditations exist at all, you have to first understand the sheer scale of the external chaos during his reign.
Right.
When Marcus Aurelius took over the Roman Empire in 161 AD, he wasn't inheriting this, peaceful, prosperous golden age. Almost immediately, the entire world just seemed to catch fire. Wars broke out on almost every single frontier.
Yeah, and the sources detail a sequence of events that honestly sounds apocalyptic. In the east, the Parthians destroy an entire Roman legion and invade Syria.
Yeah.
And then on the northern frontier, he's dealing with the Marcomanni, the Sarmatians, and the Quadi. Now, for you listening, if you aren't a Roman historian, you might be wondering who exactly these groups were.
Right. They were these terrifying, largely unknown barbarian coalitions pushing violently against the empire's borders.
Just massive threats.
Exactly. These weren't minor border skirmishes. These were existential threats to Rome itself. And if the external wars weren't bad enough, the internal situation was arguably worse. The legions returning from those eastern wars brought back a devastating pestilence.
The Antonine Plague.
Yeah, the Antonine Plague, which just decimated the population.
The sources also mention severe floods destroying vast quantities of grain, which led directly to widespread starvation in the city of Rome. The financial strain of all these intersecting crises was so immense that Marcus was actually forced to sell the imperial jewels just to fund the state.
Which is wild. The empire is broke, starving, and bleeding.
So imagine being the guy in charge of all that. If you think of a modern head of state or like a mega billionaire CEO at the absolute height of a global crisis, you'd expect their private journals to be frantic with strategy.
Right, making lists of moves.
Yeah. You expect paranoid lists of political rivals or obsessive entries about their legacy and how history will judge their handling of the disaster.
But he doesn't do that.
No. Marcus goes into his tent at the military camps. Specifically, the sources mention his camp at Granua, right on the front lines against the Quadi, and what does he write? He doesn't write a single word about military strategy.
Not one.
He writes that the whole earth is, quote, but as one point. He reminds himself that human life is a mere exhalation of blood, and that a man is nothing but a wretched soul carrying a carcass.
What's fascinating here is the mechanism of how he uses philosophy. You have to remember, in ancient world, Roman religion was deeply transactional.
Right, like a business deal.
Basically, yeah, it was a bargain. Men paid for certain sacrifices and rites, and the gods were supposed to grant favors like military victory. It was entirely irrespective of personal morality.
But Marcus doesn't do that. He isn't in his tent slaughtering bulls to buy a victory from Jupiter.
Exactly. He uses the Stoic philosophy he learned from tutors like Rusticus as this private anchor against the distorting effects of his own absolute power. He doesn't bargain with the gods. He interrogates himself.
But I have to push back here for a second because this still seems completely absurd.
How so?
Well, he has the power of life and death over millions of people, and he's writing to himself, fame after life is no better than oblivion. If you're listening to this and thinking, well, it's easy to be philosophical when you're the emperor, you really have to look at what he's actually doing.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he's actively trying to shrink his own ego down to a microscopic size.
Well, he had to. And this is crucial. The Meditations isn't a treatise written for an audience. It wasn't meant for publication.
Right, unlike the others.
Exactly. Earlier Stoic founders, like Zeno or Chrysippus, the Greek founding fathers of the school of thought, they wrote textbooks. They laid down doctrines for students.
Marcus wasn't doing that.
No, this was pure, desperate self-interrogation. He was drilling his soul in right principles so that when the next emergency hit, he wouldn't be caught off guard by his own ego or fear.
So if he's actively trying to shrink his ego, how exactly does he do that on a daily basis? Because when you read the Meditations, one of the first things that jumps out at you is the repetition.
Oh, yeah. Constantly.
He says the same things over and over. And I really want to challenge this popular modern idea of Marcus Aurelius as this naturally serene, Yoda-like Stoic who just, floated above the fray, effortlessly dispensing life hacks to himself.
That's such a common misconception.
Right. If he was so calm, why did he need to write the same reminders down hundreds of times?
That is the essential question, and it changes how you read the text entirely. The repetition is not a teaching device. It is a diagnosis of his own struggle. We have to treat that repetition as evidence.
Evidence of what?
If he has to return to an idea again and again, it reveals exactly what he was struggling to maintain.
Okay, think about it like a personal workout journal or a diet log. If someone writes, "Don't eat the cake every single day" in their diary, you don't look at that and think, wow, this person has absolutely no interest in cake. What a master of discipline.
Yeah, you'd think the exact opposite.
Exactly. You think this person is actively fighting a massive daily temptation to eat the cake. And Marcus is doing exactly that with the temptations of imperial power. He's building mental calluses. Stoicism wasn't his natural state. It was a daily coping mechanism.
Precisely. And we can see the specific psychological mechanism he uses. Look at how obsessively he deconstructs luxury and fame to strip them of their power over him.
How does he do that?
Well, he doesn't just say, I shouldn't care about my expensive clothes. He uses this technique of breaking things down into their most unappealing literal components to kind of short-circuit the brain's desire for them.
Right. He reminds himself that his purple imperial robe, which, by the way, was the ultimate exclusive symbol of global authority in Rome, is just sheep's hair is dyed with the blood of a shellfish.
Exactly. It's almost like a cognitive behavioral technique, and he does it with everything. The fine vintage wine he's served at banquets, he writes that it's just the bare juice of an ordinary grape.
He really takes the magic out of it.
He does. Even physical intimacy is reduced to the attrition of an ordinary base entrail and vile snivel. By explaining the mechanism of what these things actually are, he strips away the illusion of their value. He is actively trying to disgust himself out of being seduced by the luxuries that surround him every single day.
And he does the exact same thing with the people who irritate him. The sources highlight his famous morning routine, which is essentially him just bracing himself for the people he has to deal with.
The dreaded morning routine.
Yeah, he tells himself first thing in the morning that he will meet an unthankful man, a railer, a crafty, false, or an envious man.
Yes, he is actively coaching himself not to react with the anger that his absolute power would easily allow him to unleash.
Which is such a funny image when you really think about it. The Emperor of Rome essentially had to write, "Don't execute the senators" in his journal every morning so he wouldn't accidentally kill someone before breakfast.
It is pretty funny, yeah.
I mean, wait, I'm genuinely struggling with this.
Yeah.
If I'm the emperor and someone is incredibly unthankful or envious toward me, why wouldn't I just have them exiled? Why sit in a tent and write about how Alexander the Great and his mule driver both ended up as the exact same dust? It seems almost passive-aggressive.
Well, it seems that way until you realize he viewed that absolute power as a poison. The repetition is evidence of his vulnerability to that poison.
I see.
He was deeply tempted by anger, he felt the intense allure of his own power, and he was highly irritated by the incompetence of the people around him. He didn't exile them because he believed that giving into that tyrannical impulse would destroy his own character, which is the only thing he actually controlled.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How do we know he was actually struggling, and not just some unfeeling robot writing cold philosophy?
We have the letters.
Yes. We know because of this incredible textual discovery that bridged the gap between the isolated philosopher and the flesh and blood man. For centuries, the world only had the Meditations and official histories. But in 1815, Cardinal May discovered a collection of personal letters in a palimpsest at Milan. Now, I have to admit, when I first read our sources, I had no idea what a palimpsest was.
It's a fascinating historical accident, really. In the ancient world, parchment was super expensive, so a palimpsest is a recycled manuscript.
Like ancient recycling.
Exactly. Later writers would take an old document, scrape or wash the ink off, and write something new over it. But over centuries, the original washed-away text sometimes fades back into view beneath the new writing.
That's amazing.
Right. In this case, the hidden text was a cache of private letters between Marcus and his beloved tutor Fronto.
And these letters show a completely different, highly emotional side of the emperor. The strict, cold, stoic diary gives way to a guy who jokes around, who is doubly affectionate, and who, frankly, actually complains.
It is deeply humanizing. I mean, in the Meditations, Marcus writes constantly about disregarding the body and its ailments, seeing illness as totally irrelevant to the mind.
Right. Mind over matter.
Exactly. But in his letters to Fronto, he complains about catching a cold and sniveling after a hunting trip. He jokes about pouring oil on his head and going straight to sleep because he's just too exhausted to read.
He also expresses this profound, tender affection for his family. He calls his little daughters his chicks, writing to Fronto that by the mercy of heaven they have a healthy color and strong lungs. You read that and you realize this isn't a marble bust speaking.
Oh, not at all.
This is an anxious dad who's just relieved his kids are breathing well.
And that relief was hard-won because his life was marked by unimaginable grief. The biographical notes remind us that Marcus and his wife Faustina had several children, but they died one by one in infancy or childhood.
It's just devastating.
By the time Marcus reached his own end, only one of his sons still lived, Commodus, who would go on to be a disastrous emperor.
The letters reflect that sorrow so vividly. There's a heartbreaking exchange where Fronto writes about losing 5 of his own children, one by one, describing the sheer physical blows of bereavement.
And Marcus's response is so telling.
Yeah, he responds with deep empathy, saying, "Feeling grieved as I do when one of your joints gives you pain, what do you think I feel, dear master, when you have pain of mind?"
Which completely recontextualizes everything we read in the Meditations. The formal Stoic philosophy in his diary claims that loss is just change and alteration,
Right.
a natural mechanical process that the universe delights in, and that a rational person should accept it without grief. But the letters reveal a man who truly bled and wept for his loved ones.
It creates this immense tension. On one hand, you have the emperor telling himself in his diary that his children are just mortal beings and he shouldn't be surprised when they die.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have the frantic father who is desperately watching his chicks for signs of a healthy color. How do those two men exist in the same body?
By synthesizing these two sources, we arrive at a profound truth about him. The Meditations were his medicine, not his baseline condition.
Wow, medicine. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. He needed the severe, uncompromising logic of the diary precisely because he was a man of deep, overwhelming affections and griefs. He was a highly sensitive, emotional person operating in a brutal world of constant tragedy, death, and betrayal.
Betrayal is a great point. The sources highlight the revolt of his own trusted general, Avidius Cassius.
Oh, that was a massive blow.
Cassius literally declared himself emperor while Marcus was up north dealing with the barbarian wars.
Yeah.
And even then, Marcus's reaction wasn't a standard tyrant's rage. He didn't order mass executions.
Right. The sources show he faithfully applied his philosophy to his reality, even when it must have been excruciatingly difficult. His greatest stated grief wasn't losing power, but engaging in civil strife.
He didn't want to fight his own people.
No, he actually wanted to grant Cassius a free pardon, to prove that evil could be overcome with good. Unfortunately, Cassius was assassinated by his own followers before Marcus got the chance.
Still, it's the intention that matters.
Absolutely. He was living out what he wrote in his tent, that for each fault in others, nature gives us a counteracting virtue, like meekness as an antidote for the unthankful.
So what does this all mean for how we view his legacy? Because there is a massive, almost cosmic irony in all of this. Marcus was completely obsessed with the idea that fame is meaningless.
He truly was. He wrote that fame is an empty sound and a rebounding echo. He looked back at the great men of the Roman past, Scipio, Augustus, Hadrian, and noted how they were already becoming fabulous, meaning mythic and obsolete.
He genuinely believed that the people praising him would soon be dead and the people after them would be dead, making reputation utterly worthless.
Yeah.
He wrote, "Those words which once were common and ordinary are now become obscure and obsolete." He was completely convinced he would be forgotten, and frankly, he was fine with that.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the contrast between the Meditations and another famous historical text mentioned in our sources, The Imitation of Christ.
Okay, how so?
Well, that text was explicitly unless to others. It was meant to guide an audience of believers. But Marcus's notes were pure, private self-interrogation. He never intended for a single living soul to read them.
And that is the ultimate irony. The man who didn't want to be read, who thought fame was an illusion, who wrote alone in a tent to keep himself from losing his mind, is read millions of times over, centuries after his death.
It's incredible.
His public acts, the wars he fought against the Quadi, the laws he passed, the treaties he signed, they only bought Rome a couple of centuries of peace before the empire eventually crumbled into dust anyway.
But the frantic, private scribblings he used to survive his own mind survived millennia. History remembers the private man struggling rather than the emperor conquering.
Yeah.
His public identity, the armor, the statues, the coins, has been entirely eclipsed by his private thoughts.
It shows that the person history remembers is often radically different from the person Marcus believed himself to be. He saw himself as a flawed, grieving, frustrated man who needed constant, daily correction just to be a decent person. And we look back and see a philosopher king.
He believed his historical achievements would be his legacy, even as he recognized how temporary that legacy would be. He didn't realize that his vulnerability, his secret fight against his own ego, would be his most enduring monument.
It really brings everything back to the core of what we've been unpacking today. The truest measure of a person isn't the face they project to the world, or the official titles they hold, or the wealth they amass.
No, it's what's underneath all that.
Exactly. Even for the Emperor of Rome, a man with absolute unchecked power, the most defining battle was the invisible one. It was the battle fought entirely within his own mind, against his own ego, his grief, and his daily frustrations.
You don't read the Meditations today to learn how to command a Roman legion or manage grain shortages.
I certainly hope not.
Right. We read them because we too struggle with anger, with sudden loss, and with the temptation to think too highly of ourselves. We recognize the struggle of a man just trying to be good in an incredibly difficult world.
Marcus Aurelius realized that all his grand, public, quote-unquote historical achievements would eventually turn to dust and be forgotten. Yet, it was his most intimate, seemingly pointless private reflections that achieved immortality.
Something to think about.
It is. And that leaves you with the thought to mull over long after we wrap up today. We put so much energy into our public resumes, our LinkedIn profiles, the image we project to our coworkers and neighbors. But if you look at Marcus Aurelius, it makes you wonder, what private habit, what quiet struggle, or what hidden part of your own character are you cultivating today that might actually outlast every public achievement you've ever stressed over? When the world strips away your titles and your public successes, what will be left in the quiet space of your own mind?